Learners, welcome to my YouTube channel again. We are still on equations and inequalities, and we are going to consider quadratic equations. So today we are going to learn how to solve quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. And the formula for the quadratic equation is x is equals to negative b plus or minus square root of b to the power 2 minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Normally we use quadratic formula when we find it difficult to factorize. So using this formula will help us to find the values of x. So now let's take an example. If we are supposed to use quadratic formula to solve for x, 5x to the power 2 plus 6x minus 7 is equals to 0. Now in the formula we have b, we have a, we have c. We have to determine the value of a, the value of b, and the value of c. The value of a is the coefficient of x squared, which is 5, and the value of b is the coefficient of x, which is 6, and the value of c is the negative 7. Now, the next step is for us to put the values of a, b, c into the formula. So now we are going to have x is equals to negative 6, which represent b, plus or minus square root of b is 6, and there is a squared, so it's going to be 6 to the power 2. And 4ac means 4 times a times c, and the value for a is 5, and the value for c is negative 7. So now 6 to the power 2 means 6 multiplying 6, and we are going to have 36 as we see it in the workings. And negative 4 times 5 will give us negative 20, and negative 20 times negative 7 will give us positive 140. So in the root sign, we are going to have 36 plus 140. We are going to have 176. So therefore, we are going to have negative 6 plus or minus square root of 176 divided by 10. How did we get 10? The denominator is 2a, and a represents 5. So 2 times 5 will give us 10. So now we have to determine the values of x. So we are going to have x is equals to negative 6 plus square root of 176 divided by 10. We are going to have x is equals to 0.73. And if we take x is equals to negative 6 minus square root of 176 divided by 10, we are going to have x is equals to negative 1.93. Example 2. Example 2, we have 3x squared minus 5x minus 1. A is the coefficient of x squared, which is 3. B is the coefficient of x, which is 5. And c is negative 1. So now we have to substitute the values of a, b, and c into the formula. So now we are going to have minus in a bracket negative 5 plus or minus in a bracket negative 5 to the power 2 minus 4 multiplying 3 multiplying negative 1. So negative times negative 5 will give us positive 5. And negative 5 to the power 2 will give us 25. And negative 4 times 3 will give us negative 12. And negative 12 times negative 1 will give us positive 12. All divided by 2 times 3, which is 6. So now we are going to have 25 plus 12 will give us 37. So x is equal to 5 plus or minus square root of 37, all divided by 6. Now let's find the two values for x. So we take x is equals to 5 plus square root of 37 divided by 6 will give us 1.85. And another value of x is going to be 5 minus square root of 37 divided by 6 will give us negative 0.18. Example 3. If we have x to the power 2 minus 6x is equals to 8. And here we can see that the equation is not in a standard form. So we first have to write it in a standard form. You remember quadratic equation, the standard form is ax to the power 2 plus bx plus c is equals to 0. So now we need to equate this equation to 0. And to do so, negative 8 must move to the left to become positive. Then we can equate it to 0. So we are going to have x to the power 2 minus 6x plus 8 is equals to 0. Now the values of a, b, and c are: a is the coefficient of x squared, which is 1. B is the coefficient of x, which is negative 6. And C is the number 8. So now we can put the values of A, B, and C in the formula. So we are going to have negative, in a bracket, negative 6 plus or minus square root of negative 6 in a bracket to the power 2 minus 4 times 1 times 8. So as you can see in the workings, negative 6 to the power 2 will give us positive 36. And negative 4 times 1 will give us negative 4. Negative 4 times 8 will give us negative 32. So we are going to have square root of 36 minus 32, which equals square root of 4. So now we are going to have x is equals to 6 plus square root of 4 divided by 2, or x is equals to 6 minus square root of 4 divided by 2. Remember, square root of 4 is what? 2. So 6 plus 2 will give us 8. So we are going to have x is equals to 8 divided by 2, and 8 divided by 2 will give us 4. Another value of x, square root of 4 is 2. So we are going to have 6 minus 2 divided by 2. And 6 minus 2 is 4. 4 divided by 2 will give us 2. So now, the final answer, x is equals to 4, or x is equals to 2. Now let's see how we can solve equations with fractions. First, we need to find the LCD, which is the least common denominator. Then we must also find the restrictions. And to find the restrictions, we have to equate the denominator to 0. So now let's take an example and let's see how we can solve equations with fractions. Example 1. If we have x minus 2 is equals to 3 divided by x, what is the LCD? The LCD is the denominator, which is x. And what is the restriction? The restriction says x must not be equals to 0. So the final answer, if we get x to be 0, then it means the solution is not valid. But if x is not equals to 0, then it means the solution is valid. So now how do we solve? Now we use the LCD, which is x, to multiply what we have at the left and what we have at the right. So now x times x will give us x to the power 2, and x times negative 2 will give us negative 2x. And 3 divided by x times x will give us 3. Because x will cancel x, what will be left is 3. So now we can see that the equation is not in a standard form. So we have to write it in a standard form. The standard form for quadratic equation, remember, we said is a x to the power 2 plus bx plus c is equals to 0. So to write this in a standard form, 3 must move to the left, and once it's moved, it becomes negative 3. So we are going to have x to the power 2 minus 2x and minus 3 is equals to 0. So now we need to find the values of x, and to do so, remember in our previous discussion, we find two numbers. So this time we are going to find two numbers that when we multiply, we must have negative 3. And that same two numbers, when we add or subtract, we must have negative 2. So the two numbers are negative 3 and positive 1. Because negative 3 times positive 1 will give us negative 3. And negative 3 plus 1 will give us negative 2. So therefore, we are going to have x minus 3 in a bracket, and another bracket, x plus 1 is equals to 0. So now, let's find the values of x. If we have x minus 3 is equals to 0, then x will be 3. And if we have x plus 1 is equals to 0, then x will be negative 1. Now please check the restrictions. The restriction says x must not be equals to 0. So since our values of x are not equals to 0, we can say the solution is valid. Example 2. Still on equations with fractions. If we have 6 divided by x plus x divided by x minus 2 is equals to 5. First, we find the LCD. The LCD is the common denominator. So the common denominator is x in the bracket, x minus 2, bracket closed. What is the restriction? The restriction, x must not be equals to 0 and x must not be equals to positive 2. Notice here, if we say x minus 2 is equals to 0, the answer will be x is equals to 2. So now the restriction says we mustn't get an answer to be x to be positive 2, but x can be negative 2 or any other number. Likewise, if we take x is equals to 0, the restriction says it mustn't be equals to 0. So now let's see how we can solve. First of all, we need to use the LCD to multiply what we have at the left and what we have at the right. So now we have 6 divided by x is going to multiply x in a bracket x minus 2. So now x will cancel x. We will be left with x minus 2. Now we go to x divided by x minus 2, multiplying x in a bracket x minus 2. So x minus 2 will cancel x minus 2. What will be left? X. Hence we have x in a bracket x. We go to the right. We are going to have 5 is multiplying x in a bracket x minus 2. X times x will give us x squared, and x times 2 will give us 2x. So now let's multiply. 6 times x will give us 6x. 6 times negative 2 will give us negative 12. X times x will give us x squared. 5 times x to the power 2 will give us 5x to the power 2. And 5 times negative 2x will give us negative 10x. So now we find like terms. The like terms are 5x to the power 2 and x to the power 2. Then we also have negative 10x and positive 6x are like terms. The exponents are the same. So 5x to the power 2 minus x to the power 2 will give us 4x to the power 2. And negative 10x minus 6x will give us negative 16x is equals to negative 12. So now we want the coefficient of x squared to be 1 so that we can easily solve. So first we have to check if the coefficient of x squared can divide the equation, and we can see it can. So 4x to the power 2 divided by 4 will give us x to the power 2. And negative 16x divided by 4 will give us negative 4. And negative 12 divided by 4 will give us negative 3. So we are going to have x to the power 2 minus 4x is equals to negative 3. Notice here, the step we have reached, the equation is not in a standard form. So we need to write it in a standard form. The standard form for quadratic equation, remember, we said is ax to the power 2 plus bx plus c must be equals to 0. So negative 3 will come to the left and becomes positive. So we are going to have x to the power 2 minus 4x plus 3 is equals to 0. Here we can do by using factorization. So we find two numbers that when we multiply, we can have 3. And when we add or subtract, we must have negative 4. So the two numbers are negative 3 and negative 1. Because negative 3 times negative 1 will give us positive 3. And negative 3 minus 1 will give us minus 4. So we are going to have x minus 3 in a bracket, x minus 1 also in a bracket is equals to 0. So if we take x minus 3 is equals to 0, x will be x is equals to 3. If we take x minus 1 is equals to 0, then we are going to have x is equals to 1. Now please check our restrictions. The restriction says we must not have x. The restriction says x must not be equal to 0, x must not be equals to 2. And our answer, we have x is equals to 3 or x is equals to 1. So we can say the solutions are valid. Learners, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate. Look forward for our next video, still on equations and inequalities. And please send the videos to your friends, your family members, anyone interested to do mathematics to also learn. And please let the person subscribe and hit the notification bell to get more mathematics lessons from me. Thank you and have a nice day, learners.